Hi, Emily. Welcome. And thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to chat with you today.
Thanks for having me, Kim.
Yeah, so I know we've kind of communicated via email and on Instagram, and I just wanted to have you start with like a quick intro and a little bit about your background and really what led you into this area of focus.
I'm a child psychologist practicing in North Carolina, but I also provide parent and teacher education working with all types of neurodivergent students. So autistic children and teens, kids with ADHD, kids with learning differences, giftedness, twice exceptional presentations where they may have like a really high skill in one area but need support in another area. So as you can imagine, all of those things make school pretty hard for the kids I work with. So my background is in school psychology, and my work evolved over time after working in public schools. I'm in private practice now because I do a lot of consultation around school being hard, wanting school to be better for kids, but then also expanding that idea to like all the places outside of school that kids can learn with families and in communities and in the summer. And that's, of course, why I also write some about travel.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I resonated so much with what you're talking about. School is very difficult for my 13-year-old son who is autistic. He also has ADHD. We're struggling now with like a lot of social anxiety issues. So it's so important. And what also is so important to me is traveling. And that's really why I reached out, because I listened to your podcast about, teaching your neurodivergent kids to travel. And I think that this message is important to share with other parents, because I know there's a lot of travel anxiety for parents. So I want to really talk first about how do you suggest first and how to approach travel anxiety with parents? Because I do feel like it starts first with the parent.
Right. So there's travel anxiety of the parents' anxiety, and then there's travel anxiety of the kids' anxiety. And so we want to be clear which is which, because as parents, we feel so attached and in tune with our kids' emotions that sometimes we're predicting that they're going to be anxious about something, and actually they're going to be fine, and we are the ones who are anxious. So I first challenge you to try to separate those two types of anxieties and notice when is your child successful and not anxious? So when are they, trying new things, or going to lunch with someone and you're not there, or going to an activity and you're not there. So anytime that you're separating and they're trying a new experience, even in town, start to think about when and where and with whom they are successful. That can start to help you feel a little less anxious about traveling. The flip side of this is parent anxiety with travel often has to do with our expectations of what we have in our head about how we want something to go. And if you're parenting neurodivergent kids in any way, shape, or form, you have already realized that you're letting go of some stuff. I don't know why we all believe we are going to get the kid we imagine. Like, no one gets the kid they imagine, right? No. And we're going to be able to do these awesome things, and they're going to be into this and into that. We have no control over any of that. And as soon as we can shift our mindset from what we think will happen to just trusting ourselves to figure out what our kid loves, how can I figure out how to incorporate that into their learning or their travel or their activities on the weekend, even in town, that will help reduce our anxiety, because it will help us just own the fact that I trust myself to figure this out. I know that I don't know what's going to happen, but I trust that I can figure this out, or I trust that if something becomes overwhelming for my child, I can identify that, we can pivot, we can come home, we can cancel something, whatever the ways to problem solve that are going to come next. But just trusting yourself and trusting to your kid. Your kid knows themselves. They may not be able to express that to you right away. And this is why we have to scaffold and layer these experiences that we in teaching our kids, so that they can become aware of what they like, what's hard for them, what's easy for them, when do they want more. So we're helping them gauge that for themselves so they can communicate that to us. But when they're little, we see that as come out as behavior, or it comes out as refusal, or something's too overwhelming, and that's also messaging to us to figure out what would be best to do next.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I loved about your podcast is really you have steps. You have 5 steps in your podcast about teaching your neurodivergent kids how to travel. We talked about expectations. I think pivoting into Disney travel, as we've talked about, is how do you kind of set some expectations for yourself? I think we talked about there in terms of like, this Disney vacation is probably not going to be what I really hope it's to be. It's about my kids. But how do you set those expectations in a place like Disneyland or Disney World? It can be very overwhelming. How does something like that kind of even start in conversation?
Yeah, I think we have to start with, okay, why do you want to go? Do you want to go because you want to go, or do you want to go because your kid loves this? They're really excited. Okay, let's say your kid loves this idea and is really excited. Do they fully understand what that will feel like? Because as you said, theme parks are big and there's a lot of walking, and we got to plan out food options, and we got to figure out when we're going to swim and when we're not going to swim, so there's all these logistics that go into it. So sometimes kids' perception of a big vacation like Disney is excitement, but the actual logistics of it, we have to decide as parents to make the best guess of structuring that, jumping off from what we know our kid can already do. And so I call traveling taking the show on the road. So literally. So think about what your child is capable of at home on a afternoon or on a weekend, in terms of sleep, in terms of getting themselves ready, in terms of packing a bag, and not just like an overnight bag, but like a pool bag. Or are you doing all these things still? And it might be that you are. But if you are doing these things still, we wouldn't expect your child to all of a sudden be able to do it on vacation. Yeah. So when you're thinking about all the things that you need to do for your child or the things that they can do independently, start thinking through the logistics of that, because our children are not thinking through the logistics. They're showing up and they want to have fun. And sometimes they don't want the fun to be over, but sometimes we have to make calls as parents of like, nope, it is time for us to rest. We have walked a lot. So one of the things I think about in, layering these practicing traveling, which is we don't often think about events like this and needing to practice, but when it involves executive functioning, planning, exposures to sensory experiences like crowds and noise and heat and things like that, we need to think about what our child can tolerate and maybe tweaking only one of those things at a time. So like a weekend trip, or a day trip, I think Great Wolf Lodge is a great starter place of like, it's all in one place. You're not walking a lot. You are all in one building, but it is sleeping and sort of water park, theme park, game stuff, and food. It's all not at home, right? And there's some travel to get there. And then Disney or a theme park or a big water park is going to be more transportation, more walking, more planning. And so you just got to think about, does my kid need kind of a trial run of something smaller on a smaller scale to see how they handle that and tolerate it? And if you can afford that and you can practice that, that is a great place to start.
Yeah. Yeah. And I loved what you had said about the practice. I mean, for us, we live about 6.5 hours by car away from Disneyland. So we often fly. We've gone through, kind of visual cues of, or watching things about flying. And that has been helpful for my son. And it's not anything that we've been super successful with overnight, but we've done it enough times. He kind of knows the drill. How would you approach, I know a lot of this is like expectations in the practice. And what if your child isn't sure that they love Disneyland, but you have other kids, you want to take a family vacation, how do you start kind of that practice and preparation for your child who knows it's going to be a little bit different, maybe?
Yeah, thank you for saying you have other kids, because I think there's some families that some kids want to go and some kids don't want to go. What do you do with that? Well, I think for some kids, flying on a plane, staying in a hotel, swimming in a hotel pool, not even going to the theme park and coming home, that is successful for them. And it's a hard thing for parents to swallow, that we're going to go all the way to Orlando and we're not going to go to the theme park. But if you know your kid and you know that it is a big leap for your child to travel and to sleep in a new place, that might be what that child wants to do and can handle at that age. Also, remember, kids are always growing and developing. So it might be that trip to Disney, they don't even make it to the theme park. And that may be an extreme example because most kids are going to want to go to the theme park. But there may be some where maybe they only go to one of the theme parks, or maybe they only go for one morning of a 5-day trip. These things have to be slowly integrated if a child is easily overwhelmed. The alternative is you make them go with the family to all 5 days of something, and then they never want to go back because it was so overwhelming. And so we're finding a balance between which child wants to do what. Now, this, of course, means that you're probably going to need multiple adults with you, right? So if you're dividing and conquering, if it's possible to take a grandparent or an aunt or uncle or even a babysitter with you, some families will do that. And I know that's a privileged thing, extra thing to do, but some families will do that if they really need support with one child maybe needing to leave early and other children wanting to stay. That's something to think about when we talk about the logistics of planning the day. Many families that I work with, and I know when we did it, when my boys were younger, we live about 9 hours drive from Orlando. So we have flown and we have driven to Florida. Both we've done both, but it's a lot. Like, it feels like I've done all that. It's an investment, right? Yeah. I've come this far. This better be fun kind of feeling. And we just have to remember that once you get there, your kids will adapt and they won't really necessarily remember like all the effort it took to get there. So that's something we have to let go of as parents. But some kids will do really well in the morning only. So I know when we did it, we really planned morning only, lunch, we were resting, and then there was some, free time. Some families can go the whole day and do all that walking. Some families will plan like a pool day at the hotel in the middle of the week, because the back-to-back walking days, like, they know their kid and they know that like by that third day, it's going to be hard to get up in the morning because everyone's going to be feeling more tired. So just thinking through all of those differences in your children and what each child might need, it's a mindset shift for families, because I think this is a generational cultural change we're making. And when we were growing up, it was like, this is what the family's doing and everyone's going to be happy about it. But I think that when we're talking about neurodivergent kids, there are moments where a child can't just suck it up and join the fun. They don't have the skills to do that. And when we push against that, we're going to get a stress response, a really overwhelmed child that's going to, make it harder, I think, for anyone to enjoy themselves, especially that child and the parent who's needing to support them. So as proactive as we can be on these bigger vacations, the better. And really planning for doing less. And then if we get there and your child wants to do more, great.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one big thing to really say here, and I know that you've probably talked a lot about this, but your vacation may not look like your sister-in-law's or your cousins or whatever it is. And that is that expectation piece, that you can all go on a vacation together, but you may have to take an extended break in the middle of the day because that's what your child, and maybe that's what you need. And so I'm very vocal with family that we go with, or even talking to people on Instagram, like, your vacation doesn't have to look like the picture perfect vacation or what other people expect. We are a break family in the middle of the day. My son does now love Disneyland. It took some time to get there, but he also loves, I want to go swim at the pool for 2 hours and then let's go back for fireworks. And that's what we do. And so whatever your location is, it's important to know that your vacation may look different, but different isn't bad. It's just what works for your family. So I think.
Yeah. And I think one hang up that I know a lot of us have is how expensive everything is. Yeah. We have a feeling of it's so expensive, so we've got to get our money's worth, right? Yes. Well, we might feel that way, but our child's getting their money's worth might be a few hours at the theme park, having yummy food, taking a nap, going to the pool. Like, that might be their version of their money's worth. So we need to be careful about whatever our definition of that is. Yeah. Really, getting our money's worth is everyone having a great time. And we have to balance what that's going to look like for each member of the family.
Yeah, definitely. One of your final points is talking about wonder and teaching your child how to travel. And it really opens up this curiosity about the world and how they see things differently. And I just loved that. I feel like it's kind of an emotional reaction for me, because how I learned to love Disneyland is from those family trips as a kid with my siblings and my grandparents driving. And I want to talk a little bit about that. And maybe you can talk a little bit about that in terms of it's such an emotional, like, I feel like I'm getting emotional talking about it now. I just loved that part of it. So,
Yeah. Well, that thought of mine came out of how many of our autistic children in particular, um, can be very kind of cognitively rigid at times in terms of like they know this one thing, they love this one thing, they feel comfortable in this one thing. And it can be very hard and scary for them to stretch themselves, for them to go outside their routine or outside of the realm of what they know. But on the flip side of that, it can sometimes be limiting because there could be some other interests that they would love if they were exposed to it. And I think it's anxiety provoking to raise a child who gets really anxious anytime any change or any new things come up. And because with travel, everything is new. Like that is the whole point of it, right? Like the whole reason we do it is to experience new food or experience a new place or experience the same thing you're doing at home, but in this new, with this new person or in this new way. And just by definition, I have found over the years with my own kids and working with my clients that just traveling in and of itself, even if you're not doing anything that we would define as adults as super exciting, it's different to their brain. It opens them up to like, oh, this, it could be anything that maybe we didn't notice. Like the signs are different in this state, or the trees are different when we go to Florida, or like the water is a different color than it is at the beach in my state. Like it starts to open them up to this idea that things are just different. And I mean, I could go off on a tangent about like the beauty of like them realizing that everyone is different and we've all created these destinations and these spaces and we all enjoy different things and figuring out what they love and what their sibling loves or hates or whatever, And I've definitely worked with kids that only eat new foods on a trip or only, flex with the routine on a trip. And so you never know what's going to happen when you stretch them a little bit. And I think travel is a great way to naturally stretch a child because everyone's doing it. The routine of travel is that it is going to be different. Yeah. So to help your child, even if they feel like they're maybe a literal thinker, or very concrete, like I was saying, like a concrete, maybe more rigid thinker, if you can help them understand that travel, you can trust that I'm going to keep you safe on this trip. Travel is, though, different. We're going to eat different food. We're going to go different places. And then, of course, there are ways that we have to go one little step at a time. Like we're going to go on this trip, but let's say all your food is going to be the same. And we're going to, I'm a big fan sometimes of an Airbnb versus a hotel because you can spread out and you have, it feels more like a home. So they're like all these different things you can do to help your child feel comfortable. But there's no way that they're going to stay stuck in their routine on a trip because they're going to be naturally exposed to new things. And I've never seen a kid come back from a trip and not have grown in some way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I just want to, I want to be sensitive to your time, but any final thoughts or suggestions, maybe one takeaway for a parent who's thinking about a big trip to an amusement park, Disney, Universal, what do you think is the most important takeaway for a parent?
I mean, I think the most important thing is to not feel like you're never going to be able to do something because you don't know your kid in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years from now. You can still plant the seeds of what you love to do or take a small trip and see how they respond and then just follow that next thing that they're into. You, of course, are not probably going to take the trip maybe you would want to. I've been to more presidential libraries than I ever would have been to had my son not been my son. So like those types of things are going to come up and just to see the joy in your kid's face, even though it's something that you never would have thought of that you want to do because it makes them happy. Just remember, like, read books, watch videos of different places, like do research so that you can kind of see what they're into and then start to plan it out and just remember that they keep growing. So you may feel like it's not doable now, but it might be doable in a year or 2 years or 3 years. And just keep thinking about it every year.
Yeah. Well, Emily, I really appreciate your time. I feel like we could talk so much more about so many other things. And I appreciate you taking the time to talk about travel. I think it's so important. And again, thank you so much. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so if anyone wants to join online parent workshops, or I also offer professional development for teachers, you just go to learnwithdremily.com.